Section 6 of the Children's Wonder Book. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. The Children's Wonder Book. Section 6 The Wizard's Palace by Elton Craig. Once upon a time, a long while ago, a prince started out to seek his fortune. So he left the grim old castle where he and his father and his father's father had been born, and took the world for his pillow, as they say in old legends. For, you see, a stay-at-home prince was not thought much of in those days, it being the fashion to have adventures. He started out one morning as soon as the sun was up and shining, and journeyed toward a great forest that stretched dim, deep, and mysterious away to the west. Now this forest was enchanted, and it was said that in the middle of it stood a wonderful palace that was as green as the ocean, and had 1,006 little windows, with a dwarf looking out of each. In this castle lived a wizard, who was quite out of the common run of wizards, for he had 19 legs and 21 hands, and a poor, pretty enchanted princess. Well, the prince reached the forest just at nightfall. It was a curious place, for every flower had a little head peeping out of it, that nodded to him, and the tall trees shook their great sides with laughter, and, bending down, tried to wrap their arms around him as he passed. And this was truly dreadful, for if those goblin trees had once caught the prince, they would never have let him go. Suddenly he heard loud cries, and looking around, saw a will-o'-the-wisp rushing toward him, chased by a large bat, who was trying to blow out its lamp with its wings. Now, everybody knows that a will-o'-the-wisp is of no use whatsoever without its light, so the prince drove the bat off with his cap. "Many thanks, my dear prince," said a tiny voice in the dancing flame. "When you reach the palace remember to say 'Breck-cock, jock-lock' to everything they ask you, and you will gain the princess." With that it danced off. The prince went on, and after a long time he reached the palace, which shone like the sun in the dark wood. And just as he reached it, the 1,006 little windows flew wide open, and 1,006 dwarfs stuck out their heads and screamed all together, "Crack, crack, clack!" "Breck-cock, jock-lock," answered the prince, and they all gave a horrible yell, dropped to the ground, and rushed into the forest. "Come, they are done for anyway," said the prince, and he opened the door and went into the great hall. A wonderful place it was, to be sure. The floor was of gold, and the walls were covered with odd figures that danced and swayed and looked out laughing from between the cobweb curtains. Right in the middle of the hall was the old wizard, sitting in a great silver chair, with his 21 hands folded and his eyes shut, and by his side, in a little ivory chair, was the loveliest maiden the prince had ever seen. For her face was as fair as a lily, and her eyes as blue as the sky, while the lovely hair that rippled to her feet was like spun gold. Anyone could see with half an eye that she was a true princess. Just then the wizard opened his eyes, and seeing the prince, he seemed ready to die of rage, and jumped to his feet, roaring, "Flip-flap-fiddle!" "Brick-crock, jock-lock," answered the prince, not in the least afraid. Then the wizard screamed and rushed at him. Dear me, how they fought, while the poor little princess got behind her chair and sobbed. But at last the prince gave him a dreadful slash that cut his head off, and then there was nothing left to do but to comfort the princess. The princess showed him where the wizard kept his treasure, and they put some chests of gold on 2 horses and rode away to the prince's castle. Then they were married. They had 16 children, 8 boys and 8 girls, and the Princess dressed the boys in blue and the girls in pink, and they all lived happily ever after. End of section 6.